Hi, I'm Carys.
And I'm Gary Young.
Every week, Gary and I will be talking about those stories in the news that are over-reported and the ones that are going completely under the radar and not being talked about enough.
This is Over the Top, Under the Radar.
Gary, we're back.
After the summer of discontent, here we are.
We have not recorded an episode for like 6 weeks. It feels like it could even be longer.
A long time.
Did you miss me?
You know, I did.
You had to pause for too long. I know. No, you paused for too long, so you didn't miss me. But it doesn't matter because I'm back anyway.
How was your summer?
Yeah, I mean, it feels very much over staring out at the terrible weather. Yeah, it was all right. How about you? You had some holidays.
I was traveling a bit with family for a few weeks. Went to the States, which is where the other half of my family lives. And we went to France, saw a bear.
Saw a bear?
The bear was in North Carolina. Here's the thing I did not know about bears. They can open car doors.
Wait, okay. I need the full story now. Were you in the car?
We saw this bear. We're in the mountains. We see this bear walking. We're like, oh, look, there's a bear. Then we go back to what we were doing, and then we hear beep, beep, beep. We hear the car horn. The bear has gotten into one of the cars looking for food and is honking the horn. And then it turns out all of the car doors, all of them were open. And suddenly everybody became bear experts. So somebody said, oh, it's a little baby. And then somebody else, my partner, she was like, no, I think that's an adolescent bear. And I was like, adolescent bear? Do bears even do? And like, what, you know. But anyway, if you go to my Instagram page, you will see a little shot of this bear.
Wow, and check it out.
In my holiday snaps. And then you will hear someone say, or two people between them go, fuck. Dude, so I saw a bear.
Bear, if you're listening, write in, tell us your side of the story. Did Gary not have enough snacks in his car?
Yeah, apparently we didn't. But black bears, I learned, they only mess with you if you mess with their kids, which is not unlike humans or anybody else. Yeah, it's the brown bears, apparently, that will really go for you. But this is me now posing as a bear expert, when really I saw one get in and out of cars and honk the horn. That's what I saw.
I saw a film I think you should see very recently, actually, at the end of the summer. It's called Kneecap, named after a band, an Irish hip-hop band called Kneecap, who are from West Belfast, and they rap in Gaelic.
I need to know more. This is a significant departure from the Commitments.
It's, definitely a different vibe to the Commitments. A bit more for those, it's not as appropriate for kids. It's like, sex, drugs and rock and roll, but hip hop. It's so funny. Well, it's very political. It's about the death of the Irish language and Northern Ireland and what does it mean if a language is being taught in schools, but no one's like making music. And then there's just loads of amazing rapping in Gaelic about waking up and having a spliff, and the dissies, which is slang for dissidents. It's really great. If you have time to watch it, I would recommend it. Listeners, if you like Kneecap, tell me about it. I loved it. So good, so funny. And really political and rich, but without being heavy-handed. Thank you so much to everyone who signed up as a Patreon supporter over the summer. We really, really appreciate it. We've got a few hundred Patreon supporters now, which is amazing. We're so grateful for every penny. If you can donate to support the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. You can make a regular gift and you can help to keep Over Under going and to cover the costs of making the podcast.
And this week's new sign-ups are Hannah, Marky Rob, Malika, Meander, George, Nikki, Linton, and Martin. Thanks so much to all of you. My under is Grenfell. Now, that may seem like a weird under because it's being massively covered right now because the report has just come out. So for those of you who don't know, the Grenfell Tower was an enormous tower block in West London that caught fire in 2017. 72 people died. This was in the wealthiest borough, certainly in London. And there was an inquiry which reported earlier this week, and to nobody's surprise, really, outlined the catalogue of failure from central and local government and corporate failure that led to what they describe as a completely preventable set of deaths. So it's become a somewhat totemic tragedy in Britain. But the reason why I talk about it as being under the radar is because I think in a range of ways, what happened in Grenfell with the four horsemen of late stage capitalism, inequality, austerity, deregulation and privatization coming in, literally killing people, certainly leaving them dead, is one of those stories that wouldn't have happened if the issues and the people it affects had not been under the radar for so long. And that, to me, is what the inquiry revealed. Because what the inquiry kind of showed was these multiple levels of negligence. It called it an entirely avoidable occurrence. Negligence from the government, the bonfire of red tape, which then ends up as a real fire in which people died, from David Cameron, the coziness of government and business, corporate negligence, lying, dishonesty. It also therefore shows a failure of the media. These things have been going on for years. They somehow occurred oblivious to the rest of the media. I think there are three primary reasons for this. The first is the decline in local media. Kensington, Chelsea, the activists at Grenfell United, they said they did have a good relationship with the reporter at Kensington and Chelsea Chronicle, but that closed down actually not that long after the fire. Kensington Chelsea is one of the London boroughs that has no local newspaper. Grenfell is now a national story, but in the long run-up to what happened, it would have been a local story. And it could have been a local story, but it's difficult to have a local story if you don't have local storytellers. There's the other question which I've raised in other episodes about class. I think if we had a media class with more working class people in it, it would have been different. The issues about flammable cladding were known for decades. I do not believe if there are similar issues related to, I don't know, private schools or something that editors of the Telegraph or wherever were kind of more interested in, I've no doubt that we would know more about it. But we have a media class where the newspaper columnists are more likely to have gone to private school in Oxbridge than high court judges and lords, and that has an impact. And so the story continues to be untold, and then it flares up as it has this week, and then it will subside again. And I feel like we've seen this with Windrush, the post office. So I think it speaks to a real failing, among other things, in British journalism.
The other thing for me is this inquiry was commissioned in 2017, and it's only now reporting back like 6 or 7 years later. And one of the things that Grenfell United, which is a group of some of the families impacted by the fire, one of the things they're campaigning on, they've got together with families affected by COVID to say these public inquiries like take too long and aren't acted on enough. And it's a very British thing, I think, this thing of like appointing some sort of lofty lord, sir, so-and-so, and then they go away and they write a detailed report. But I mean, a lot of the stuff was stuff that was known and reported on at the time. So it also feels a bit like this lack of urgency also feels like a part of the problems you describe, and of just who matters in this country. And I found some of the coverage at the time difficult because it felt like for those of us that grew up in poor communities and social housing, the pearl clutching and the shock that this would be allowed to happen just felt like it's a real dissonance with what you know, which is like, no one gives a fuck about us. Like, that's why there's damp on the walls. That's why if we complain to the arm's length organization about a problem in the building, it doesn't get fixed. And I guess, as you say, it was like a perfect storm of all of those things, like corporate negligence. The report is very clear that companies lied about whether materials were safe. The Kensington and Chelsea Council, who, honestly, I don't know how anyone on that council sleeps at night. The richest borough, I think certainly in England, possibly in the UK, that not only allowed this to happen, but like couldn't house people after they'd been made homeless by this fire. It's just a layering of all of the worst things about British society. But yeah, something about the way that certain sets of the media seemed surprised also felt a bit like, okay, so we're just going to lie about what it's like in the UK.
There was that element to me, a bit like George Floyd or Windrush or any of those things where you have something that is known but not told, which suddenly becomes news to the people who make the news, but isn't news to the people who are experiencing it. And then news outlets and the media class kind of fall on these things. They know it's interesting. They don't know what to do with it. They are eager and incompetent. There is something about this kind of lost innocence where they're so careless with it that they keep finding it and then losing it again. This didn't just happen yesterday. It's been happening for a while. And you've been quite determined not to be interested. And this is what it's taken, which is the point. This is what it's taken for you to be interested.
I mean, that idea of, because there were people locally and outside of the community who were raising concerns about this type of cladding. And there had been a fire in Camberwell, I believe in 2009, of a similar nature where, thank goodness, there wasn't a huge loss of life. But this idea, that ultimately, like, poor people had to die for people to hear what they were saying is just horrible. There was a statement in the Commons to coincide with the public inquiry, and that exodus of MPs before the Prime Minister stood up to talk about Grenfell also felt pretty distasteful. It's a national tragedy. It's a national shame. And also, given the speed with which we've tried to deal with the cladding issue, you probably have people in your constituency living in unsafe buildings. So I was just I thought that was classless.
I think it's vying to be a national tragedy. Unfortunately, I don't think enough of the nation identifies for it to qualify yet. They look at it as a kind of poor, mostly migrant London issue, which, given the amount of cladding that exists elsewhere in the country, is almost, it's just not the case.
Maybe when it happened, that was true. And certainly Theresa May's refusal to meet the families, because presumably she did not want to be told off when even the bloody Queen went down. I think that was true. But weirdly, I think as it became clear that cladding affects everyone, and, I know a few people who don't live in social housing and own property and it's impacting, I think it then did. And I don't know, it's hard. I live in London. I'm from London. I care a lot about this. But there's a very visible visual reminder with the tower block still standing. I would like to hope that most people consider it a tragedy.
It's not that they don't consider it a tragedy. I think that the state of national tragedy demands some sense that this is tragic for the country as opposed to just being tragic. Windrush would be another example of something that is considered like a black tragedy, but not yet, I think, a national disgrace. But I think it vies for that because it won't go away.
For those of you in London, there's a really wonderful Chris Ofili work in the Tate Britain that's in tribute to a young artist who died in the fire.
And for those of you who subscribe and get the newsletter, I interviewed Chris about that mural, and we'll put the link to that article in the newsletter.
I think I'll give you my under the radar, and it is the election results in, I'm going to say it wrong, Thuringia, a region in East Germany, where the Alternative for Deutschland, the AfD, the far-right party, the Nazi party, won 33% of the vote this week. It got some coverage. Obviously, it's not an election result here, but I think that under the radar for me is with results like this and the riots over the summer, I guess it's the rise of the far right and of white nationalism. And under the radar stories are stories we think have been underreported or reported in the wrong way. And I feel very passionately that what's happening right now isn't being dealt with well by the mainstream media. we get these moments like riots or protests or election results. And there's again this kind of shock horror and a deep dive into the most visible parts. So like with the AFD result, Bjorn Hock is the leader of the AFD in that region and is a truly charming individual. This is someone who's been fined multiple times for using Nazi slogans, something that is not legal in Germany, and kind of does this like, oh, well, I didn't know it was a Nazi slogan. But he's also, since his initial fine, has like done a call and response. This is someone who a journalist once sat down and interviewed and was like, guess the quote, is it your book or Mein Kampf? And he himself could not tell. And I believe it is legal in Germany and generally to call him a Nazi because of his politics. So he won an election in a part of Germany where unemployment is slightly higher than in wealthier regions. There is a sense that people feel left behind, that to get jobs, they have to migrate to the West. And so it's a story that's familiar, but that I don't think we're digging into sufficiently. We're just being shocked when these people pop up, but we're not really having a conversation about what has led to the rise of the far right, how we're going to deal with it. And also, like, what is the alternative story that needs to be told that isn't immigrants are to blame for all of your problems? So yeah, AFD/white nationalism is my under this week.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a good one because if and when it's Muslims that we're talking about doing things like this, there is a whole raft of they don't understand European civilization, they don't subscribe to European values, it's a murder cult, it's a death cult, they have to be put under surveillance. But the biggest threat to Western democracy at the moment is coming from white supremacy. That's the biggest threat. And it's understood as almost like a whoopsie, you know, that's a bit worrying. Where did that come from? And like you say, they don't deal with the roots of it. And one other thing I think is really kind of interesting is there is a significant support for the AFD in West Germany, but it's bigger in East Germany. And there you have to ask yourself, there was a communist state in East Germany for the best part of 40 years. What did they do? What did they do? What did they say? What did they not say about race and racism that left those people so proud? The reason why it relates to Britain is a lot of these areas where people were out rioting were kind of Labour voting areas as well. You know, in 1950, Walter Ulbricht, who was the leader of East Germany, said, we have gotten rid of racism. There is no more racism. And that was the end of it. And then 1989 came, and lo and behold, they started calling 1990 to 94 the baseball bat years in Germany because of the attacks on asylum seekers and migrants. There is a broader question of the far right, but then there's also the question of failures of the left, I think. Neither of them are particularly examined well.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the stat that got reported constantly with this recent election result was, for the first time in 80 years, a far-right party has won in Germany. And I think we could talk about Germany, we could talk about Italy, we could talk about the Netherlands, we could talk about France. I guess the thing I want to talk about is that this is a trend that's happening across multiple countries at a similar moment for a reason. And obviously in Germany, it feels particularly egregious because it's a country that at least tried to deal with and talk about its fascist history. My understanding is, you know, the same thing didn't take place in Italy, for example, around Mussolini. But yeah, I think one of the challenges is that A, we have to talk about stuff that's been happening over decades rather than in the last few years. And journalists often don't want to do that. And then I think B, there's this manufacturing of some of this stuff by the state and elites. Like Samuel Huntington, who's an American international relations academic expert, published an article which became a book called The Clash of Civilizations in the wake of the fall of the Berlin Wall. So I think maybe the article's the 80s or early 90s, where he, an elite thinker, very explicitly says, we've defeated communism. The next fight is going to be with Islam. This Islamophobia, which fuels a lot of these far-right movements, is something that was constituted and manufactured, not just by people on Telegram or TikTok. Yes, these groups are mobilizing online. Yes, Telegram is scary. But really, the full conversation talks about the ways in which elites and the centre in a lot of these countries, if not reinforcing anti-migrant sentiment, certainly not challenging it. And in some instances, manufacturing it. So yeah, it feels like there are a lot of chickens coming home to roost. And as well as having the real conversation about why this exists, we also pretty urgently need to talk about how to fight it and how to stop it. And that was a beautiful thing about the Walthamstow mobilisation in response to the riots in the UK, that people turned out in numbers to say, no, you don't represent us. These aren't your streets. My understanding, others will have followed it a bit more closely, was that the police were hesitant or reluctant to encourage people to come out on the streets. But in the end, even the Met Police's statements, not the government's, but the Met Police named the community response as part of what dealt with the riots. And that is what we, and I'm going to speak for over under listeners, but maybe not, maybe some of you are far right, feels unlikely. We need to be organising, because the police can't fix this, the government can't fix this. These are our communities and we need community responses. And I hope people learned that lesson from Walthamstow. I didn't get to go, but people I know said it felt good to be there. It felt important. It felt powerful. Obviously also lots of milling around, but that's just protests. We are the ones that stopped this unrest by reminding them that they don't have the numbers.
Yeah, in the words of June Jordan, the African-American essayist, we are the ones that we've been waiting for. I feel like there are things the government could do. And one of the things the government could do is not encourage the rhetoric. That the government has done this thing of kind of sending the bigots to jail, the ones that they caught, but potentially embracing the bigotry and putting it into legislation. It worries me beyond this immediate conversation that kind of, we have this Labour government that while those things were carrying on and while the embers were burning down, we had the winter fuel payment is not going to be made, that all of the things that assist community cohesion are either not being done or they're being delayed. The notion that some elements of society have that nobody's speaking up for us, we're going to take it on ourselves and we choose these people as the victims, becomes much more attractive.
And I think that's a parallel with Germany, where they have this traffic light coalition who are in this, similar sort of centrist impasse, because there's so many parties and they can't get stuff done. And it feels like we've got this centrist Labour government that really isn't putting out a socialist agenda or talking about community cohesion. I think the thing that also not shocked me, but freaked me out a bit after the Southport killings, which were nominally the thing that sparked this, but the speed with which the protests were happening, this was like a pre-baked thing that was ready to go. And it was a perfect storm of the main drivers and catalysts of modern fascism, because it's little rumor, it was a Muslim that did it, boom, everyone just happens to know where all the hotels are that refugees are being held. So yeah, that sense of there's this organized thing, and that if the only state response is you're thugs, we're putting you in prison, we're not dealing with the sickness. It's absorbing some of the concerns, but then nominally being hard on the violent face, the explicitly violent face of the unrest. I'm thinking about Jack Straw saying he's not comfortable with a woman in burqa or niqab coming into his surgery. I'm thinking about Boris Johnson calling Muslim women letterboxes, or the weird comments by Jonathan Ashworth and Keir Starmer about people from Bangladesh coming to the UK in the election campaign. If we're not honest about the fact that there's a sort of sanitized version of this that political elites produce, then we can't really deal with the unsanitized version and the quote unquote thugs. Okay, Gary, tell me you're over the top. Cheer me up.
My over the top is about a new British social attitude survey, which has come out, so do I. I love a good survey from those people.
Love nerding out. It's so robust, Gary. It's so robust.
What it's shown is a decline in people, and I'm going to talk about how this is worded later, but a decline in people who are proud of being British, a decline in people who would rather be a British citizen than anything else, a decline in people who feel good about British democracy. All of these are significant declines, and then lesser declines for people who are proud about economics. The problem with are you proud of British history? It's like, well, what does that mean? Are you proud of the NHS? Yeah, that's British history. Are you proud of the massacre of the Mau Mau? Not so much. Also British history. Like British history, which is the kind of the speech I'm waiting for a Labour leader to give. This country's done things that we can be very proud of. It's also done things that we should not be proud of. To have some understanding of what it means to be British and to have some devotion to the country, you have to be able to keep both those ideas in your head at the same time, and it's not that complicated. But in the absence of that, we get this ridiculous rhetoric. It's generally understood that the pride in being British, decline of 22 points is quite significant, from 86% saying they're proud to 64%, is actually connected to a significant drop in people who said that they thought that it was important to have British ancestry. In other words, there is a more complex and nuanced understanding of both what it takes to be British and what British history is about and for. And then the things that people are proudest of, the arts and sports, they happen to be things that we're best at. Or I don't know that we're best at them, but that those are places where we shine. Just to give a kind of sense of like how, of the trajectory of something like this, is that there was a survey that was done in 1948, the year of Windrush, and it asked people if they could name a British colony. Half of the people could not name a British colony.
Oh, Lord.
Yes, and among those who got it wrong, one of the colonies mentioned was Lincolnshire as a British colony. One was the US, and this was the year that 492 Jamaicans arrived on Windrush. So you get a sense of like why there might be some disorientation, right? If you don't know where these people are coming from, you don't know what you're doing around the rest of the world, and you've chosen not to know, you've chosen to be ignorant, then you can see how far we've had to come in terms of teaching Britain its own history, because Britain doesn't really want to deal with it. And the over-the-top element of this comes from, of course, the Daily Mail, the Telegraph. They had a bloody kitten when they saw these, and they blamed the left for rewriting British history as opposed to just writing it. Not so much rewriting it, it's saying, well, you left out the 300 years of stolen land and stolen labor and you went straight to emancipation. You might want to fix that. Too complacent about patriotism, the left rewriting history. They were absolutely terrified and enraged by this development. That in itself makes me feel great.
I mean, I haven't heard the phrase having kittens for a while, so thank you for that. It's a classic. Yeah, I mean, it's the Maya Angelou quote that I'm going to shorten, but like, know better, do better. That is, you're right. It's cause for optimism, because once people know that Lincolnshire isn't one of the colonies, they can do better, or at least understand a bit more. And that's a positive trend. I think also it is a reminder, because there's a lot, rightly, about the toxic impact of social media and digital misinformation on our politics and our debates. And also the reason that like a bunch of Gen Zs are talking about settler colonialism is that the internet has slightly democratized information and meant that people can learn things that they aren't taught in school, and people can produce content about the British Empire or settler colonialism or Windrush without necessarily having to get it into the Daily Mail or the Daily Telegraph, who are never going to write the truth about empire. So I think it's cause for optimism. Also, I'm very proud of our arts and sports. And also a reminder that there are a lot of good things that have come with digital media, news media, social media, and that is the ability to challenge big established mainstream narratives. Excellent over. My over the top. I've thought of a lot of cheesy ways to begin this.
Give us your cheesiest.
Okay. Maybe. I don't really want to know how your garden grows. Because I just want to fly.
Oh, Lord.
Lately.
Okay. Oh,
Did you ever feel the pain
Stop it now.
of the morning rain?
Yeah.
As it soaks you to the bone?
We're knee deep in Gouda.
Yeah, okay. So my over the top is the Oasis tour. Before anyone comes at me, I'm not talking shit about Oasis. who I actually have seen live.
Hang on, why not?
My issue isn't that Oasis are reuniting and touring. I really have no strong feelings about that. My issue is just quite how much the people who are journalists shape the news and information that we receive. And just to be blunt about it, the core demographic of Oasis fans maps pretty neatly to the core demographic of journalists, i.e. slightly older, mostly white men. I've heard, Gary, so much about this Oasis tour, about the pricing, about the process to get tickets. It's now literally created a political issue about something that's been happening for 2 years, which is the differentiated pricing that Ticketmaster do. There's all these like, well, maybe we need to look into Ticketmaster. Is it a monopoly? Sidebar, yeah, it is, but it's been a monopoly for a long time. These companies are super shady. But basically, because a bunch of, again, don't want to generalize, but just speaking to the demographic information we have, most likely men in their 40s and 50s really want to see Noel and Liam Gallagher live, and because they can't, suddenly these things are issues. And Gary, I do think the number of times I've had to see the Gallagher brothers' faces on the front of newspapers over the last few weeks is somewhat over the top. Too much Oasis. They're just a band and they're going on a tour and it's hard to get tickets. You don't get as much Beyonce, do you? You don't even get as much Taylor Swift because young women like those people.
I don't know. I feel like I got quite a lot of Taylor Swift, actually.
We did, maybe because people's daughters like Taylor Swift, but like there was also this weird thing that happened on X/Twitter where all of these men who like want to get Oasis tickets and are worried they weren't started like imagining these hypothetical young women, Gen Z women who are going to get their tickets and you shouldn't be able to like, and then Andrew Tate, who is like, was 10 when Oasis were releasing like their biggest albums, was like, you know, it's about the time and the vibe and walking into a pub and this idea that there's this group of people who really get Oasis and they deserve the tickets. And these hypothetical like Gen Z women, they shouldn't be in the queue. They don't deserve. It's just been quite a strange, you know, and you're like, oh, if journalists were all me, then this is what the media will be like. It will be loads of Beyonce, a skew towards South London, like lots of chat about social housing. And it's just like a sort of microcosm of what the media class is. And Gary, lots of political podcasts that I listen to have had more than one. Like, it's not just like, I'm talking about 2 episodes in my feed about Oasis, 2 about this tour.
I mean, I think that it's senior journalists we're talking about because it's people of around it would be around my age. So the people who make the call. And I actually do have a funny story that illustrates the point that you're making. That one time there was an editor and I saw it all happen. He came in and he said, "Who saw Jamie Oliver last night? Wasn't it great? I love Jamie Oliver." So I thought, okay. Then in the ideas meeting, when they were talking about what they're going to do, they said, "We're going to do Why Does Britain Love Jamie Oliver?" It had gone from I love Jamie Oliver to Britain loves Jamie Oliver. And then the next day, the front page was Why Do We All Love Jamie Oliver? And it had just gone completely kind of seamlessly. La nation c'est moi. I am the country. There is a cut through to politics here, just general. I know that it's all politics really, which is that age of people, which is my age of people, also came of awareness. I was 10 when Thatcher came in. I am more or less of the kind of age of the sort of people who mostly write columns, which means I grew up during a period of Labour defeat, of electoral collapse, of the defeat of the unions and so on. Those same people who love Oasis tickets were also raised in the climate of where the common sense was Labour have to get rid of nuclear disarmament, Labour have to become less like Labour, the working class is dead, history is over, communism has collapsed, the only future is capitalism and so on and so forth. That's what they grew up with, that and Oasis, a few other things as well. That's also why we get the commentary that we get, I think.
2 things I want to say about this. One is, for the record, I actually find the Gallagher brothers to be hilarious and banter. And I think there are many Oasis bangers. I was at a wedding on the weekend and there was a big sing-along as soon as an Oasis. I mean, there were a lot of sing-alongs. We were very drunk. It was a good soundtrack. But one of the songs was an Oasis one. So there's no shade or hatred to Oasis. Also, I'd forgotten also the joy of a Liam Gallagher interview. he was asked what music his kids like. And he was like, grime, Stormzy, Skepta. So, yeah, sounds about right. And then he said they were also into an American rapper called What's That Ricky, who is actually called ASAP Rocky, but I kind of enjoyed the slightly like middle-aged dad energy. It was like, what's that guy? What's that Ricky? Yeah, they like him too. So, I mean, I'm not mad about the return of the very quotable Gallagher brothers. And, the odds that maybe they'll have a fight and the tour won't happen. It's kind of delicious to me. But yeah, I think it's a benign version of something that's happening all of the time in newsrooms, in the media that you've outlined. There's this group of people from a very specific demographic. And like, if you're not matching their demographic or didn't have their life experience, when you're the only one in the room, you're like, okay, how do I bring up the race thing? How do I pitch the Grenfell story? And then bloody Tom over there is like, Oasis tickets were £500. They were what? And it's that, it's like a sort of benign version of what it must be like to be in newsrooms in the UK, of just like Tom and Bob and Will or whoever's an Oasis fan, just like pitch. And they're like, yep, do a full story on that, do a deep dive. That's when it's kind of funny. But like, what about the other times when you want to talk about sexual harassment or Grenfell or Windrush, and you're talking to someone, who's got a very particular frame of reference and just doesn't really think it's news or important. So I'm over chat about Oasis. Thank you for listening to Over the Top, Under the Radar. Remember to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Make sure you sign up to our newsletter at overunderpod.com.
If you want to support the show, you can find us by searching Over the Top, Under the Radar on the Patreon website.
And connect with us on socials at over_under_pod_.